Hey guys, it's Dinobot, and just wanted to make a video update about the recent 1.0.3 patch and the changes and how it affected the Witch Doctor. I thought there were a lot of changes in the game, specifically changes to our class. Some of the changes are very positive. I think the game's heading in the right direction. However, I think there was also some major collateral damage in the process. The Witch Doctors probably took a harder hit than any other class, which is really unfortunate because I thought this patch was going to open up a lot of doors for us. Even before the patch, I believe this to be one of the most build diversified classes in the game, and this should have been even more true when the patch dropped, but Blizzard made a few mistakes. I'm going to go ahead and discuss the different builds affected by the patch. Most of all, Dart's kiting. I knew this build was going to take a hit because of the IAS nerfs, but unfortunately it just re-brought to the surface the problems with darts to begin with, and that's their slow casting animation. There was a good band-aid put on that problem with IAS, but with it being taken away, it's once again coming to light that the casting animation of this ability is just terrible. And a lot of players are saying get over it, there's a pros and cons to every ability, but you can't kite with this ability. You can try, but you're trying to have to predict incoming damage, and if, say, a mortar goes off, you can't cancel the animation. You're locked into casting that dart. And I think at the very least, Blizzard needs to allow you to cancel that animation of the ability and make it possible for you to dodge stuff. You shouldn't be hindered if you have good skills and fast reaction. You should be able to negate that damage and not be forced and be locked into a bad animation. Hopefully Blizzard will take a look at this, especially since that band-aid's been ripped off, but I don't know if they're going to change it. They may leave it how it is. Unfortunately, the other build that was hit, and this wasn't really intentional whatsoever, was Zombie Bears. I think Blizzard really dropped the ball here. They unintentionally broke the mechanics of Zombie Bears, and the pathing on them is horrible. They get caught on just about anything, and pretty much unless you're point blank, it's not really worth using anymore. Some people may disagree with me on that. I know that both these builds, darts and kiting, and zombie bears are still viable to a certain degree. It's just going to be a lot more difficult to pull them off. Blizzard has stated that it's a known and unintended issue, and they're going to fix it in the next patch, 1.0.4, but we have no idea when it's going to hit, and for now, you guys might have to shelve this build or make adjustments for it until that day comes. Tanking builds, I'm biased on this one. I know guys made a bunch of videos about Witch Doctor tanking, but it's become more viable than ever. Sorry to say, but it is. They severely nerfed the damage in Acts 2 through 4, and a lot of mob mechanics were changed to make them less annoying for melee. For example, succubi or the different bird mobs or anything that had a lot of movement in the pathing, they hold still for a little bit longer, and it's a little less annoying to tank. Now, the other reason I think it's more viable to tank is because with the decent gear, you'll probably die way less often than you were before unless you make a mistake, and repair builds were increased so much. A build focused around minimal deaths can lead to better returns on your farming efforts. It was semi-enjoyable last night to see a lot of my glass cannon friends get rocked still in the late acts while I was just chilling and not wasting all my gold on my repairs. I'm not knocking glass cannons at all. I just feel that farming is on a more even level. Glass cannons seems to be still very effective farmers, but with changes to repair costs and zerging, I think it's a bit more balanced. The con to a tanky build is, of course, you're not going to kill things nearly as fast as a glass cannon. However, you spend less time dead, which means less gold spent on repairs, and there aren't any champion affixes I feel I'm forced to skip. So, let's playstyle isn't everyone, but I feel the changes are a nice direction in order to make farming a bit more even. Now, I know a lot of tanks out there prefer to use pets in their build, and I think pets are going to see a rise in popularity over the next couple weeks. They're still far away from where they need to be, but I think with just a little bit more tweaking, we'll finally start seeing some late game viable builds based around summons. With the lower damage output of mobs, pets are surviving a lot longer and can be used in places it wasn't possible before. I think once they apply the health scaling to pets, they'll be in a really good spot as they scale very well with defensive base gear. And that change is slated for a later patch, but it's something to look forward to in the very least. I think it's nice to be able to use a gargantuan for parts of Acts 3 and 4. Who knows, it may be possible after a bit more experimentation for someone to find a viable way to use pets. Now, tanky DPS builds, I think these aren't very popular right now, but a few people have already caught on to this, and it's probably the most viable build for a Witch Doctor in Inferno, and by that I mean the most efficient. because the nerfs to damage, you no longer have to commit fully to tank or fully to DPS in order to progress. You can better balance the two aspects into a really good hybrid build that's bringing results to players. There are many variations of the build, and I believe it kind of boils down to preference, but the basic concept is to get a good amount of resistances, health, armor, and damage. Enough to take quite a few hits in any act, but also dish out a respectable amount of DPS. I don't think it'll be long before we see quite a few builds based about on 25 to 30k DPS, say tanking stats of 3 to 4k armor, 600 or so resists, and maybe 40k HP. The only downside of the build is it requires multiple pieces of really balanced, good stat gear, and that tends to be extremely expensive. However, you no longer need extreme amounts of defensive stats to survive in later acts, so a build based around much higher DPS and slightly lower defensive stats probably going to be the most efficient. I think it'll be a while before we see this be pretty popular because, like I said, those pieces of gear are going to be extremely expensive, but I think this is going to be the way to go in the future. Now, if I missed any of the popular builds out there, or build you think might be viable with a patch and you really enjoy it, please go ahead and comment and let me know. I'll review it. If it seems really good, I'll go ahead and throw it up here with the rest of mine. I'll give credit to the poster, of course. I think the bottom line is the more builds are viable than ever. However, it opened up some doors and closed others. Hopefully Blizzard's going to take a look at all our legitimate issues and find a solution for them. Now moving on to the overall gameplay changes, I'll go ahead and start with the IAS nerf. I thought this was a really good change for the game. I know for some people it was a really rough change. I'm sorry if you spent a lot of gold or a lot of real life money on that gear, but you kind of had to see this coming. I discussed this a little bit earlier, but it wasn't right that people were just stacking a primary stat and IAS and getting ridiculous returns on it. People were getting much farther in content than they should have just with these two stats. They were able to farm gold better than anyone else in the game and just created this really big discrepancy, especially between ranged and melee. The problem is melee was being required to balance all these other stats just to progress, and they were having a much more difficult time even with much more expensive and well-rounded gear. And these players were stacking two stats were getting way ahead of them for much cheaper. So I think that was a really good balance. It's going to have a significant impact on the game. I'm sorry for those, again, that spent a lot of money on trying to get this gear, and I know eventually you had a balance set, but it just wasn't fair, and I think it's going to be a good change. As far as repair costs go, I think they'll benefit the economy and balance the disparity between melee and ranged as well. Diablo is always one of my favorite games because of the build diversity in the game, and you can go with all these crazy builds and find a way to make it work efficiently within the game without feeling punished for not following the ideal build. The problem with Diablo 3 is this wasn't really encouraged because you were encouraged to do what was the most efficient, fastest thing in the game. And that meant just getting as much DPS as you could and DPSing things as quickly as you could, and you didn't worry about dying. Now with repair costs going up, that's actually a concern, so you have to balance the risk reward between am I going to spec a bunch of DPS and risk dying and then paying those costs and it not being worth killing a certain champion pack, or do I want to go more tanky and I'll kill things slower but I don't have to worry about dying paying those repair costs and it will be worth killing every single pack I run into. I think it's really good that it gives players a choice between, okay, do I have to choose between survivability or damage? And it's not just a winner every single time you pick damage. Now it may be less efficient or not worth your time to spec as much damage, and you may want to focus more on survivability. It's again just one more tuning factor that will balance the game. Now, I think it's also going to help the economy because the more gold in circulation, the less valuable it becomes, and this enforces a money sink the game badly needed. Gems are the only other real gold sink in the game, and you aren't required to spend it on them as the upgrades are marginal at best. So it does kind of suck, yeah, but in the end it's going to be a solid overall change because it's going to balance the discrepancy between melee and ranged even more, and it's going to create a necessary gold sink to stimulate the economy. Moving on to item drops, I think this was a necessary change in combination with the IAS nerf. Because the IAS nerf, a lot of players are going to be upset, a lot of their gear is going to feel worthless to them, and they're going to go back to where they can't progress in Acts 3 and 4 anymore because they're dying so often they don't have the survivability to be tanking the stuff, and they don't have the DPS anymore to get it down before it kills them. So the item drops is a good solution because now they can go back to Acts 1 and 2 where they should have been to begin with, and they have a good chance of getting this end game gear. Before, the problem in the game was it was so hard that you needed Act 3 and 4 gear to progress in Act 3 and 4, and it wasn't possible to get that gear earlier in Acts 1 and 2. Now you have a small chance of getting that gear, and there's a more defined progression arc instead of the broken model of farming gold to buy gear from other players who are in that act. Now, with the item drop change combined with the difficulty adjustments, there's a relatively smooth line of progression for your character to follow. Now, what do you guys think? I think with the exception of a few badly needed changes to the class and the game, it's overall in a pretty good spot. I think once some of the rage dies down of the initial shock and impact of the changes, I think most level-headed folks will agree. Some of you guys might take that as a shot, which I don't mean to do so whatsoever. If you disagree with me, by all means, feel free to express yourself, post the comments, and keep this discussion going. All I ask is that you please be constructive in your responses and offer solutions to a proposed problem instead of just complaining about it. Look forward to hearing what you guys think, and I'll be checking the thread and often to update with feedback and discuss the topic with you guys.